The night before we had a rainstorm predicted, I was frantically trying to finish this last garden row, and I've been adding rows over the summer to be able to extend out our garden. I was hoping to finish the row before the soil got wet and difficult to work with. The next morning, we awoke to some pretty intense fog in the morning, which we rarely ever get fog. It was really pretty, but it was also a little eerie. So we decided to go ahead and make sure we got our homestead ready for any major rains. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into with this rainstorm coming, but we got the rabbits fed, we got all of the garden and everything set up, and I had actually taken the kids off to a play date, and on our way back home from that play date, we hit this storm. I was driving on the freeway and I had to slow down to about 20 miles per hour because I couldn't see. The rain was coming down in sheets.
Oh, the garden. Look at that garden.
At this point, hail started to come down and I was super concerned about our garden. From this angle, you can really see how our entire yard was completely flooded. The bulk of the storm lasted for about an hour and then it continued to just slightly drizzle, and during that time we decided to go ahead and check the damage that had been done.
It's literally a river of water flowing through the orchard.
We had low spots on either side of the house and in the back, and I'm guessing that's just from the grading they did. The orchard was hit pretty hard, and it did. It had a river that flooded all the way down into our ditch, which was pretty full by the end of this storm. At this end of the ditch, it didn't get as full as the other side. And our poor, sad berry patch, it got really flooded. There were even some strawberry rows that were completely covered. For the entire next day, I didn't go outside a whole lot. I was a little scared and discouraged by how much rain we got and what it did to our homestead. But after that, my brain began to formulate plans. So this is 2 days after the storm, and I'm showing you here that the entire trench that we had dug and then refilled for our frost-free drains, our frost-free waters had sunken in completely from all the rain. And so we're gonna have to go back and fill that in. I took this time to also go ahead and just turn off all of our watering systems because of how flooded everything is. They were not going to need any watering for several days, and in fact we had more rain predicted after this. So here's the berry patch 2 days after, and it is still very wet. And as I was walking around, I noticed that this raspberry plant had several red juicy berries, and I didn't dare walk out there because of how muddy it was. I'm not afraid of mud, but as you can see where my kids have walked, it leaves giant craters in the ground. So I was hoping to avoid that. I headed over to turn off the water to the orchard, and this pipe had really gotten wet and muddy over here, and in fact this whole area, the rabbit hutch, so this must be a low spot, and we're gonna need to raise up the dirt underneath the hutch just so that it doesn't get as muddy. Our kids came out here to feed the rabbits and had a little fun with the mud, and so it is now all over our hutch. So I think in the plans for the future we will raise up this area just so we can have easier access to feeding and watering the rabbits. Our kids use these buckets to stand on to water them. I walked over to check on our orchard, and it has a pretty low spot that hasn't completely dried up yet, and so we might raise up that area as well. I'm still trying to decide what we're gonna do with this area. At first I was thinking wood chips, but after this storm, if we had put wood chips here, they would have literally just all run straight into this ditch. So I'm contemplating between just putting down like a pasture mix that we can use to feed the rabbits, or gravel, which isn't my favorite, but it wouldn't get down this, like, this was about 2 feet down and the gravel would stay in place. Our mammoth sunflowers were just starting to bloom during this storm and I was worried about them, but they have made it to the end. So the garden, it actually did pretty good during this storm. All of the aisles are super muddy, but the corn had a rough go and it was just the heavy winds. I went ahead and turned off the timer for the garden and just took a moment to think about and plan for what we're going to do to help our homestead stand a better chance against any future flooding. All of these rainstorms have made it possible for me to be in the kitchen a little bit more than normal. Otherwise, I would prefer being outside. So I decided to go ahead and make up some pickles, to can some and preserve some pickles. I have some fresh dill from our herb garden here and it smells amazing. We also have some grape leaves. I'm following a recipe by Melissa K. Norris, and she talks about using grape leaves to keep your pickles crispy. And here is the brine I am making. In her recipe, she talks about how using like a tea infuser to add the flavorings into your brine so that you don't have to strain hot water later. But I actually just put my seasonings inside this tea towel and draped it into the pot, and it worked really well. So I'm gonna have to admit that these cucumbers that I will be pickling are not from our garden. So I planted about 25 feet of pickling cucumbers in our garden, and what I've noticed with all of the squash or viney plants that I planted this year, none of them are really producing well. Like, I'm getting a lot of the male flowers, but none of them female flowers. So I'm not getting any squash from my squash plants, no pumpkins from the pumpkin plants, and I've really only gotten a couple cucumbers from our cucumber plants. So that gives me a clue that our soil is just not providing the nutrients that the viney plants or squash plants need in order to produce. So I will definitely be doing my research on how to improve that, already starting to by planting cover crops in all of our rows this year. So unlike our peppers, our onions, our cabbage, our cauliflower, those things are all doing really well, but the cucumbers are not. So I saw a sale on cucumbers and I decided to grab a ton of bags so that we can make pickles, because I still want the experience of it, and I have been doing research. And after doing pickles, I'm realizing that it is definitely one of the easier things that you can and process. It doesn't take, you don't have to pre-make anything. So besides the brine, which was very simple. So now that I have that experience under the belt, hopefully next year, as a true gardener would, we all hope for the better next year as some things fail and other things do better. But hopefully we can get that, get some better harvesting cucumbers. So when I was making this, I actually almost forgot to put the dill into this jar, and that would have been a sad jar of pickles. So what I've done up to this point is I added 2 teaspoons of mustard seed, a head or 2 of dill, and then packed in these pickles. Oh, and the grape leaves, don't forget those. They add like a tannin, that's the word that Melissa K. Norris used in her recipe, that make it so your pickles are more crispy. So now I'm just packing them all in, and then I will pour in the brine. So these jars are warm. I had them sitting in hot water, so they aren't gonna get like shocked by pouring in the hot brine. So I went ahead and got those ready. So I was kind of confused because in her recipe she told us to use about 8 pounds of cucumbers, which I had. And she said it would only make 4 jars of pickles. But I have 6 jars, so I was a little worried I wouldn't have enough brine. But I was just kind of hoping that, you know, anyone who writes the recipe will prepare a little bit of extra brine just in case. So I was just moving forward with faith on that one. Anyway, so as I was making these cucumbers, I did have a lot of time to contemplate over the past few days of having that huge rainstorm, having it flood our yard, and being, extremely grateful that our home was perfectly safe. We were raised up enough that the water didn't even come close. But, my initial reaction was that I was frustrated that our whole yard was so flooded, and just how that was going to add a lot more work to our future projects, and just worry of rainstorms. And then I had a day to process that, and then I was able to move forward and just be able to plan. And I was actually found myself grateful for this storm, and in fact that it came before we have put in our chickens, and we had our rabbits, but they weren't in harm's way because they were raised up. But if we had put our chickens where I'm planning to put them, those would have been totally flooded. So now we know that, and we know that where we're going to put our chickens, we'll need to raise that area up a little bit so that when flooding does occur, the chickens have a place to go and be safe and dry. So it was a good thing in the end, and it gave us some ideas on how we can improve the drainage of our yard with the downspouts on our home. Obviously, I want to do some rainwater collecting so that we can, harvest some of this water, but there's just so much that comes at once that we have a plan B for that. So I, in the end, was feeling a lot more hopeful about our future here on this homestead. First it's kind of doom and gloom. Oh no, how are we going to get anything done with these sorts of floods? But then I just had to remember that these only happen once a year, and that, if we plan around them, we'll be totally fine. And something else that my husband and I mentioned was, once you get things planted in the ground, it does end up sort of soaking up and keeping the dirt and holding it all together. So our goal is to plant things all throughout our homestead, and to get pastures going on in our ditches out front, and maybe even pasture in the orchard, just to hold the soil together. So I've been really able to take this and turn it into something that is good. So now I've got the brine on these jars, and I just wipe the top, put on the lid, and just tighten it to finger tight. You never want to over tighten these, at least that's what they say. And I put them in. Because we're at such high elevation, I usually have to add 5 to 10 minutes on our processing time for water bath canning. And because these are a high acidic food, well, we put a lot of acidity in there with the vinegar, we can just water bath can. And I've seen steam canners going around, and I'm really tempted to get one and try those. But for now, with all the other craziness we've got going on, I'll stick to just what I know with the water bath canning and a little bit of pressure canning. Again, I am just extremely grateful that our family has chosen to do a homestead. It's something that you really can do, no matter where you live. There's various homesteading environments. Some people are just food homesteaders. That term was thrown out at the homesteading conference, and I had never thought about that. But that's what I was when we were first living in our apartment. I just tried to focus on our food and, being more, cook from home. Anyway, I just feel like with this rainstorm, it has really taught me that, a homestead is more than just growing your own food, but it gives you opportunities to roll with the punches, to take what comes and go with it, and to be able to grow and to stretch with it. And I just really look forward to being able to grow and to stretch with our High Desert Homestead. And I really look forward to having you guys around here with us. If you want to go ahead and subscribe, I post videos every week. See you next week.